been broken. But now we are seeing that those instructions are becoming must language instead of must should or must will language, which strongly implies to any person just casually listening that they don't have an option. Now, this was addressed, I think, at the end of 2014 by the Kansas State Supreme Court. They ruled that this kind of language was inappropriate, and they said it flew too close to the sun of a directed verdict, referencing mythology there. But basically they're saying you're essentially directing jurors to vote guilty, and that's not allowed. And the case was overturned in part on that basis. So I see that as an area where this explicit misinstruction to the jury is likely to be challenged more and more. And I would also add that in November last year, the Fully Informed Jury Association actually filed a friend of the court brief in the case of Noah Kleinman in California, who the state wanted to prosecute him for medical marijuana-related charges, but realized he had followed the law and dropped all the charges against him. At that point, the federal government stepped in to prosecute him, and in that case, jurors saw people outside holding signs about jury nullification. When the judge found out about this, he stopped the trial, mid-trial, and individually called in the jurors one at a time to aggressively question them about what they had seen, what they thought it meant, if they thought it applied in this case, basically with the goal of removing anyone who had any inkling of jury nullification being something they would consider in this case. And so that case has been appealed. And I should also add, there were also the most aggressive jury instructions we have ever seen in that case, discouraging jury nullification. I believe the wording pretty much told them that if they nullified, they would be breaking the law, which is untrue. And to back that up, I now have a Supreme Court justice who in the last 2 weeks has actually spoken publicly on jury nullification. Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor, in a conversation at the New York University School of Law on February 8th this year, just a couple weeks ago, said that the Second Circuit has an opinion that basically says juries should never be instructed about jury nullification, and that any instruction that would suggest it is wrong. She says, I hewed very closely to the Second Circuit line for many, many years. As I've grown more in the system and watching it, I'm not so sure that that's right. Think about what juries did during the civil rights movement. If it weren't for jury nullification, we would have many civil rights individuals who would be convicted felons or otherwise for things that today we think are protected by the First Amendment. There is a place, I think, for jury nullification. So, to my mind, the jury instruction issue is going to be more and more challenged, and it does have the potential of eventually going to the Supreme Court.
Thank you. We have 10 minutes left, more or less, and so take it.
I wanted to mention one more case that addressed the situation you had where the judge said there can be no jury nullification. There was a case in the trial where the jury asked the judge about jury nullification during deliberations. The judge said there's no such thing as a valid jury nullification. The jury ended up returning a guilty verdict, and on appeal, the appellate court said the judge was dead wrong to say there's no such thing as valid jury nullification, but the Court of Appeal went on to say we're not going to overturn the guilty verdict anyway. Basically, it said, the judge was wrong to say this, but we're going to let the conviction stand, which just goes to show the depth of the tension here, and the fact that, as Kirsten says, it's probably going to end up in the Supreme Court eventually.
So what I wanted to say is that maybe we ought to keep the comments short, so everybody has a chance to say have a say.
It's finally becoming clear, so I would like to more.
A little bit more that I could just say briefly about this is that there's tension in the law about what a jury can do and cannot do during deliberations. and whether or not jury nullification is valid. I saw one case not too long ago where a woman who was impaneled on a jury in deciding a drug charge did a little bit of outside research and determined what the range of punishment for the drug charge was, even though the jury had not actually been told. And she decided based on that range of punishment she had to vote not guilty because she couldn't, in good conscience, send that person to prison for that length of time based on this drug charge. Later, the court, she was prosecuted for contempt of court because she was instructed not to do her own research. And that ultimately, I believe, was overturned, or she was not convicted of contempt of court because you can't punish a juror for what they say and do during deliberations. But it was a scary instance of a judge or a prosecutor or whoever trying to suppress a juror for exercising her right in that case. So that's a troubling case that emerged. Another troubling set of scenarios that have emerged outside of deliberations involves activism by jury rights activists who are displaying signs and banners that inform jurors of their right to nullify and have been prosecuted in a couple of cases with jury tampering. Which, again, I believe none of those have actually resulted in convictions, although I could be wrong. But is another
You're correct.
Is another example of how prosecutors will try to squash the rights of juries to even know about nullification from a source outside of the jury room. And the final thing that I just want to mention is that as much as there's defense or conscience can serve as a barrier when something actually goes to trial and is in front of a jury, having the jury nullification power is very important. But given the state of over-criminalization in this country and the power of prosecutors to throw all kinds of laws that might have outrageous sentences attached at a defendant, there's enormous pressure for defendants to plead out, and so their case never gets in front of a jury to begin with. And that power of over-criminalization and prosecutorial discretion means that no matter how powerful a jury is, the prosecutor can just dodge that entirely by threatening the defendant with all kinds of outrageous things.
Is it different in different states? I mean, which are the worst with the judges?
I actually have a project I've started called the Jury Health Project to try and assess the situation of various states. Everyone in every state has the authority to vote not guilty for any reason they believe is just. That said, your ability to use it does vary by state. In fact, there are 2 states where you don't need a unanimous jury to convict someone. We all think of the jury as 12 people and everyone has to vote guilty to convict. But in fact, these protections have been eroded over time. And in Louisiana, in a post-Civil War constitutional convention, where they were specifically designing their constitution to disenfranchise newly freed black citizens from the political process. This is where you got your poll taxes and literacy tests and things like that in terms of voting. But they also changed it so that you would only need a 9-3 verdict to convict someone, meaning that you would have to have 4 black people on a jury for them not to be ignored. And the likelihood of that, as we've seen even today, is very little. And then similarly in Oregon, I should say Louisiana now it's a 10-2 requirement, but the Supreme Court has said that the states may impose as little as a 9-3 verdict for conviction. In Oregon, it's also a 10-2 requirement, and that was instituted maybe a couple of months after a particular case of note during a time of heightened anti-Semitism when a Jewish defendant was acquitted, I think it was a hung jury, actually. There was one holdout juror who was an immigrant. And so I'm getting ready to travel out to Portland to look at all these old newspaper articles. My understanding from what I've read remotely is that there was a lot of anti-Semitic rhetoric, there was a lot of anti-immigrant rhetoric, and this was the basis on which they decided to change to a 10-2 vote. So think about what that does. We heard, I think it's Patty, who said she had a jury that was 11-1. That one person prevented a conviction. Well, that's not possible in Louisiana or Oregon. So there are a lot of different elements that contribute to your ability to whether or not you actually can have that power.
I was just going to mention, just as a comment, when citizens approach to be selected for a
Can you
jury.
speak up a little bit?
Oh, yeah. When it just seems interesting to me that when citizens go to jury selection, that the lawyers essentially choose who's going to be on the jury, and they discard anybody that might be essentially problematic to their case. So the group of people that are already invited to be on the jury are already, selected from a smaller group of people. They've already been whittled down, in other words, to take out the troublemakers. I'm just thinking about when a citizen comes to be in a jury, they leave their job, they leave their children for a period of time, and they enter into this very intimate experience where they basically bring all themselves to the situation in a sense of service as well. We do it because we believe in democracy and we want to be a participant to a system that we believe in. So we bring our honor essentially to the process. And what I'm seeing here is that it's already bought and sold completely. Another example of how unfortunately this country has some seriously big issues in denial in and of itself as a culture. It seems. I think we all do. It's probably the world. But what's fascinating to me is that we come with our hearts and that we almost don't stand a chance if we don't know about our ability as citizens to have the right. And I think what's fascinating, the reason why I came as well, just to support you, but also when Sergio was talking about how in Occupy trials, jurists would come out and ask for forgiveness because the level of intimidation and manipulation is it's very hard to get around. You have to have a very strong constitution to be able to stand up in that force that's against you. And so this has been really informative, and I'm grateful. Thank you very much for what you've presented.
Thank you. So it's getting to the time. Maybe anybody wants to do closing thoughts? Each of us, anybody want to say something before we close?
Well, I just want to say I've been in 4 or 5 juries and I never heard this. So it seems maybe it's not commonly known.
That's definitely true.
Anybody else?
In the trial of Tim Christopher, who bid on government lands at an auction, I don't know if you remember that, and he was sent to prison for 2 years. He's out now, but that would be a great nullification example, I would think, for the greater good of the environment, which is why he bid on those lands. There must have been something they could do without putting him in jail for 2 years.
That was actually an interesting case because his jurors were individually screened to get rid of anyone who had any inkling about jury nullification. And if you look at the documentary Bidder 70, I think it is, and on the DVD at least, and I think this is also on YouTube, there's like an after discussion from the premiere where he talks about the whole process by which the jury selection was manipulated to ensure that jury nullification could not happen.
Not surprising.
Yeah. So this is my closing thought, which I'm not the last one, but in the case of Los Angeles, they spent $100 million in the houseless, and about 86 million is to harassing them, to put them in jail, to give them tickets. And so they have made an account that the city spends about $30,000 in every homeless person. And in the city of Denver, they have given them houses. And they are now spending only about $12,000 per homeless person. So they're saving money. So this idea of having to punish anything and having to get away with punishment and change society by punishment, that's only one way. There's other different ways that can be done. Being creative, compassionate, and that is out of God in us, and that can be seen in human beings and Jews too. Anybody else?
Well, I must say you've organized a very helpful discussion. You're well organized and good people to support it. I wish you
We learned a lot.
You learned a lot.
Thank you, CK.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Well, let's close with silence.
Well, I think Sergey said that I should plug FIJA.
Oh yes, all right, that's right.
Our website is fija.org, just our initials for Fully Informed Jury Association. And I will add that I had a recent interview with Keith McHenry of Food Not Bombs. There was actually a jury nullification in Florida, and one of the people who was working with the 90-year-old World War II veteran who has been distributing food, he has not been brought to trial, but someone else who was working with him did, and there was a jury nullification in that case. And I also have previous articles from a fellow in the Bay Area in California, Aram James, who when, I can't remember the town, it starts with a P, north of San Francisco, I think, when they criminalized sleeping in cars with 6 months in jail as the punishment, he began advocating for jury nullification in that situation. And you are eligible for a jury trial when you are at risk of 6 months or more in jail. So, but that has since been repealed, but we see, the ongoing criminalization of these basic human needs. So that's, I think, an area where this could be definitely applicable.
Thank you. Thank you, friends.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, like that. Go for the next thing. Of course you.